Good morning, third grade. I'm going to get started with our social studies lesson today, and we're going to go into our textbook, and I'm going to read with you on page 258 and 259 about a famous American named Cesar Chavez. Now, Cesar Chavez is a hero to many Mexican American people. Remember that when people immigrate, they move from one place to another to live. But sometimes people migrate and they go back and forth, or they go from one place to another. Now, Cesar Chavez saw people who were called migrant farmers, and he was a migrant farmer for a time himself, and they would move from farm to farm working. And it depended upon the season of the year. So I'm from Minnesota, and I do remember that there were migrant workers because do you know about the Jolly Green Giant? Well, that's from Minnesota. The Jolly Green Giant is in southern Minnesota, and they grew lots of vegetables. And you can still buy the canned vegetables from Del Monte and um, the Green Giant vegetables in the grocery stores. And those are grown in Minnesota and packed in Minnesota. And so sometimes people would come all the way up north to work for a while in the fields in Minnesota. But you know it gets cold in Minnesota. Sometimes we have snow. Well, we can have snow just about any month, but oftentimes by October, it's snowing. So the migrant workers, there was no work for them. So about September, right when school was going to start, they would oftentimes have to pack up and head south. And they might go south to Iowa, where there's a lot of corn growing, and they might continue down into Texas. And oftentimes they would go into California, or they might just stay in those southern states. And in California, of course, we know their winters stay warm and they can grow crops even during the winter time. So there were a lot of things that could be grown, and they needed a lot of workers. So the migrant workers, many of whom were Spanish speakers, Mexican Americans, would travel to California to work seasonally in the fields, picking the crops or working in the canning factories. And Cesar Chavez saw that many of these people were not paid fairly. They oftentimes had to work long, long hours out in the hot fields. And sometimes they were not even given time to have a bathroom break or a lunch break. They were not given time to go and have a drink of water. And if they did have to go to the bathroom, it was outdoors. And so he saw that people were not being treated with much dignity, and they were not being paid fairly for their work. And so he became a civil rights worker, a human rights worker. And he was especially popular among the Spanish American and other farm workers, or Mexican American and other farm workers. I'm going to go ahead now and start reading on page 258. It's interesting because in religion, we've been reading about leaders. And Cesar Chavez was a leader. We start with a quote. My motivation comes from my personal life, from watching what my father and mother went through when I was growing up. His mother and father, they had a store and they owned some businesses, but they came upon hard times and they lost their businesses. And so they had to become migrant workers, looking for whatever work they could do. When Cesar Chavez was born in 1927, his family was facing hard times. That's right before the Great Depression. The family members were migrant or traveling workers. They worked mostly with other Mexican Americans picking grapes, beans, carrots, and lettuce. Field work is seasonal. Workers are needed only at different times and places. Like other migrant workers, the Chavez family was always traveling around California and Arizona to work. As an adult, Chavez never forgot his family's hardships. In 1958, he became the national director of the Community Service Organization. This group worked to gain civil rights for Hispanic Americans. In 1962, Chavez helped form the National Farm Workers Association. This group worked for higher pay and a better work environment for migrant farmers. Chavez did not believe in violence. That's like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. They didn't want to use violence to make change. He organized peaceful actions to help the workers. He held public hunger strikes in which he did not eat for many days. These hunger strikes brought attention to the lives of the workers. They might show some of these protests going on TV, and other people would hear about it and see that, oh my gosh, this is terrible that these people are being treated this way. Cesar Chavez died in 1993. More than 50,000 people came to his funeral. In 1994, former President Bill Clinton honored him with the Medal of Freedom. Now we know that we want to take a look at the pictures. Pictures that were taken of the person at the time of the event. Those are primary sources. We learned about that in one of our last lessons. So those are some primary sources. Here we see a button. People would wear these buttons oftentimes. They would pin them onto their clothes. And it says, "Nonviolence is our strength." And it's got a picture of Cesar. And then this is a patch that people would wear called United Farm Workers. And it's part of a union, United Farm Workers of America. Buttons and patches like these were worn by Cesar Chavez supporters. Up in the top picture, we see Cesar Chavez talks to farm workers in Salinas, California. At the bottom of the page, we also just talked about timelines. We see a timeline. And on that timeline, we see that he was born in 1927, and at the age of 15, in 1942, he had to leave school. He had to leave to help his family earn money. Many of the children of the migrant workers did not get to go to school, or they would go to school for a little while and then they would have to leave. So imagine you wouldn't be able to learn how to read and write and do your mathematics very well. And oftentimes you wouldn't make friends because you were going to leave again in a couple months. In 1958, when he was 31 years old, he became the director of the Community Service Organization. And we read about that. And they were the ones who worked for civil rights for the Hispanic Americans. When he was 35, in 1962, he formed that National Farm Workers Association. And we saw the patch, which is a primary source, again. It was actually worn by one of the workers. And in 1962, I already said that. And in 1993, at the age of 66, he died. Now, he was a role model to many people, not just Hispanic Americans or Mexican Americans, but for many farm workers, for Black people, white people, Asian American people. He was a role model to everyone, just as Martin Luther King was. So we're going to go on now, and we're going to read about Miguel, who has to make a decision. Cesar Chavez had to make a decision. He saw how people were being treated, and he knew he had to do something. So let's take a look on page 260. Thinking about consequences or what's going to happen because of my actions can help you make the best choice. And in our Catholic school, we oftentimes say, think about what would Jesus do? What would be the right thing to do? So a choice is also called a decision. When you decide something, you make a choice. There are steps make a thoughtful decision. You don't want to make a decision real quick if you don't have to. You want to take some time to think about things. So number one, you're going to list your choices. Number two, gather information that you need. Number three, think about the consequences of each choice. If I do this, then what could happen? There might be something good that could happen, but maybe there's something bad that could happen. Number four, decide which choice will have the best consequences, the best outcome. And number five, make the choice and act on it, just as Cesar Chavez made a choice and then he acted on it. So we're going to practice on page 261. We see Miguel in the picture, and he makes a chart to help him decide what to do with his free time. He wants to volunteer at an animal shelter, but he also wants to play with his friends. He uses the steps in this lesson to make a thoughtful decision. So, what are Miguel's choices? Play with my friends or do volunteer work? Number two, what information does he need? Well, he needs to know, where would he do his volunteer work? What time would he be able to do volunteer work, and what time would his friends be playing? How will he get to where he needs to go to play? How will he get to his volunteer place? If he doesn't volunteer, who will do the work? If he doesn't go and play with his friends, what might happen? Thinking about the consequences. So which choice do you think Miguel should make? Volunteer at an animal shelter? He'll be helping a lot of animals, and he'll get to have fun with the animals too. It's going to make him feel good, but it's also going to make the animals feel good. Or play with friends. Well, it's fun. He'll have fun. And his friends, it's kind of fun to hang around with. I wonder, which is a better consequence? Having fun, helping others. It's good to do a little bit of both. But I think in this case, Miguel is going to find time to volunteer at the animal shelter. And he'll still have time to play with his friends. So now we're going to go into our workbook. On page 70, make a thoughtful decision again. Read the letter Miguel wrote to helpful Hank. Then follow Hank's suggestion and complete the items that follow. Dear helpful Hank, I'm right here. My sister and I have a lot of toys that we don't play with anymore. Our parents want us to fix them up and give them away to children who do not have many toys. I'm not sure I want to give my toys away. What should I do? Some of you may have had this kind of choice to make. Here's what helpful Hank says. He writes back. Dear Miguel, you have a decision to make. Try following these steps in order to make a thoughtful decision. Good luck. Sincerely, helpful Hank. So he didn't tell Miguel what to do. He said, stop and think about it. So make a list of the different choices Miguel has. Give away his toys he doesn't play with, or keep his toys, even though he doesn't play with them. Give away his toys, keep his toys. Now, gather the information that will help Miguel make a thoughtful decision. Well, you might find if you go like to Goodwill or to some secondhand shops, find out what kind of toys are children looking for? What kind of toys do the stores need for people who maybe can't afford to buy the toys new at the store? Are there a lot of kids looking for toys to play with? So you might find some information by going and visiting some of those places and asking the people. Number 3, think about the consequences of each choice and write them down. Well, let's see. If I keep my old toys, they're just going to sit there on a shelf or in a toy box, taking up a lot of room maybe. They might even kind of be making a mess in my room. But I'd get to keep them, and they're mine, and I like them. But I don't play with them anymore. What about giving them away? Well, somebody else would enjoy them. Somebody else would give them a home. Maybe somebody who couldn't afford them would enjoy playing with them. Number 4, decide which choice will have the best consequences. You decide whether it's keeping the toys or giving the toys away, and tell why. So number 5 says, make a choice and tell how Miguel should act on it. Put your choice down on line number 5. What should he do? How should he go about doing this now? Okay. We'll talk to you later.